sci-fi shows that no longer get, or have never gotten the attention they deserve, and attempt to bring them back into the light. This episode... Lobster Man from Mars is a fantastic love letter to the entertainingly terrible B-grade sci-fi movies of the 1950s and 1960s. If you weren't around in the 1950s and 1960s, and somehow have managed to never watch late-night television, you may have missed this phenomenon. B-grade movies were originally made as secondary features to be shown after good movies. However, eventually they basically became a genre in their own right. The bad acting, terrible effects, ridiculous dialogue, and almost incomprehensible storylines had this strange appeal to it. They were often weirdly charming, and many of them, popularity-wise, have actually managed to outlive the main features they were supposed to be supporting. But enough of this history lesson. Let's get to Lobster Man from Mars itself. The film is, for the large part, a film within the film. A film within the film being Lobster Man from Mars. From the get-go, you can see them paying homage to the low budget and low production quality of these B-grade movies. The film within the film is being edited by Stevie himself, alone in his bedroom of his mother's house. We then get introduced to the production company, who, due to shady business practices, need a tax loss to avoid paying back $4 million. So they begin looking for a film that will lose money, an absolute flop.
I need a movie. A two-bit, lousy, stupid little cheap movie.
Cue Stevie's pride and joy. For the most part, excluding a few cutbacks to the audience of Stevie looking hopeful and the producer looking a little bit like he's a dying animal in pain, and the ending of the film, almost the entirety of the movie is Stevie's homemade creation, The Lobster Man from Mars. And it is a doozy. The storyline holds true to many of the B-grade movies it's parodying, due to a calamity on another planet, Mars.
According to my divinations and calculations, Mars is about to run out of air. This is serious!
An alien monster is sent down.
Call for the Lobster Man!
And of course, there's the one thing that's always going to get in the alien's way. A young couple who seems to always have inexplicable personal relationships with the one scientist capable of understanding and destroying the alien threat. As I mentioned in the reviews for Forbidden Planet and the Buck Rogers serial, sexism and unequal representation in old sci-fi is all too common. This is addressed and parodied brilliantly through the character Mary, who, once again, is the only female character in Stevie's film.
Definitely of Martian origin.
How do you know that, Professor?
Oh, Mary, be a good girl, go into the kitchen, make a nice hot cup of tea, and remember, the pot to the kettle, not the kettle to the pot.
Tea for two and two for tea.
Been dealing with lobsters for centuries.
But that wasn't a lobster.
Mary, we seem to have run out of your excellent tea. Be a good girl, go in the kitchen and brew us some more.
But I just...
Now listen, sweetheart. You don't want to worry that pretty little head of yours with a lot of man talk, do you?
No, we just...
No, why don't you just go in the kitchen, make some more tea, and leave the Martians to us?
Tea. For three male chauvinist pigs.
On top of the knowledgeable scientist and the one female trope, we also see parodied in the film the military man who's willing to pull the trigger, and, for bonus points, a film noir-style private detective who is home to some of the funniest one-liners I've ever heard.
Who are you? And what the blazes are you doing in our closet?
My name, Tommy Sledge, P.I. Pissed indefinitely. And look at this. Lobster tracks. It means that either he escaped, or he walked backwards from the horizon to commit suicide in this bonfire.
As far as the special effects go, we see a wonderful throwback to films like the 1959 Teenagers from Outer Space, where, once zapped by an alien laser, the bodies of the deceased turn straight into skeletons. It looks really cheesy and really funny. It always has and always will. The Lobster Man's spaceship, despite trying very hard to look terrible and low budget, which it did succeed in doing, actually turned out quite a lot better than many of the B-grade movies they're parodying. For some reason, in many of these films, often the alien monster hides in a cave, and when I was watching Lobster Man from Mars, I was actually certain it was the same cave from Teenagers from Outer Space, and it wasn't until I put them next to each other that I was able to tell they weren't. I then thought it might be the cave from Robot Monster, but it's not that one either. How many caves are there in America with monsters hiding in them? Speaking of Robot Monster, Lobster Man from Mars directly parodies a few sci-fi movies, one of which being Robot Monster, which is why that worked as a segue. In the film Lobster Man from Mars, there's a secondary monster called Mumbo, who looks and walks almost identical to the monster Roman from Robot Monster. Considering Robot Monster holds the dubious title of worst movie ever made from some people who obviously haven't seen Spider-Man 3, it's likely that this similarity was very much on purpose. Slightly more generic, we also see Lobster Man from Mars paying tribute to the space bat monsters we see in Zonta, the Thing from Venus, which perhaps was also partly what inspired the name of the movie. Outside of character influence, we see reference to the infamously unconvincing cutaways to stock footage of the military utilized by Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Professor, you have less than 2 hours before I order in my troops, who are assembling even as we speak. You have an hour and 58 minutes. Make the most of it. I'm off to join my troops.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
We made it.
It should also be noted here that Plan 9 from Outer Space is also often considered the worst movie ever made. I have seen both of them, and if I was to choose a movie that was the worst movie ever made out of the two, of course excluding Spider-Man 3, I would have to say Plan 9 from Outer Space is more enjoyable than Robot Monster. Despite it being the main focus, the film doesn't only parody B-grade sci-fi movies. Outside of the B-grade genre, we see a reference to Alien, an extremely convincing Rod Serling impersonator,
Men from Mars or Cruel Hoax. Police are investigating the strange and fantastic discovery made earlier today on the outskirts of town at Zip's Last Chance Gas and Grub. Hungry patrons report finding the place completely deserted, with the exception of 2 human skeletons. Is this the work of Martians or natural causes?
a Scooby-Doo style chase scene, and a throwback to Dracula.
Good evening.
Now at this point, you might be a little bit worried that Lobster Man from Mars is inaccessible to you, humor-wise, if you haven't seen any of the films I've mentioned, or if you're not familiar with B-grade movies from the 1950s and 60s. However, I wholeheartedly do not think this is the case. Much of the humor in Lobster Man from Mars is almost Monty Python-esque in nature.
Hello, operator. Connect me with the authorities at once.
The jokes, characters, and storyline, ridiculous as they are quite capable of standing on their own 2 feet. In this respect, it's quite a lot like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which itself is a parody of B-grade sci-fi movies from the 50s. Hence the movie's introductory song, Science Fiction Double Feature. Therefore, I believe the Lobster Man from Mars, just like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, is quite capable of drawing in and entertaining far more people than simply the fans of the sci-fi genre. However, I admittedly watched the film before I was into sci-fi and found it quite hilarious, but then when I watched it again recently for this review, after watching a lot of B-grade sci-fi movies, I did find it far funnier. So, if you've got the time, go Go and watch 30 or so B-grade sci-fi movies from the 50s and 60s, and then come back and watch this film, and you'll enjoy it more. If you don't have time though, do just watch Lobster Man from Mars. Considering this film is supposed to look low budget, and successfully fulfills its role of being a comedy, I really have nothing negative to say about Lobster Man from Mars. So if you're looking for a really funny film to watch while having a few beers with a few friends, or are a big fan of 1950s B-grade movies, or just comedy in general, Lobster Man from Mars is the movie you should see next.
It's the greatest movie I've ever seen in my life. What action! What passion! Wow, it's great!
Thanks for watching. I have been and still am Grindle.
Do you think you can kill an alien spacebat with bullets?